questions again. That'll be
The
great.
one about you being very kind?
No, not that one, but that's cool.
All right, that's very kind of you, David. So in terms of so for today's presentation, is mainly about Azure, so database CI/CD with Azure DevOps. So the technologies that this presentation will cover is mainly Azure DevOps, and then we're looking at an Azure SQL database as the database that we want to source control. But this also works with Synapse dedicated SQL pool as well, and also any on-prem SQL Server databases. So a little bit about me. So at the moment, I'm currently working at Wesley Mission Queensland as the team leader for data architecture and engineering. So I've been working in data ever since the start of my career, but within Azure, it's probably been the last, I'll say like 6 years or so that I've been working with Azure technologies. And with the establishment of a lot of greenfield projects, that comes with the territory of establishing the ways of working. And I've been working with Azure DevOps a lot in terms of establishing kind of the DevOps boards and sprint planning, and then also with source control and CI/CD as well. So this presentation is going to be quite demo heavy. So there'll be a little bit of slides to just go through the a bit of the background as well. So I guess one of the big questions is in the data engineering space, it's getting better, but there seems to be sometimes a little bit of lack of software development control, such as source control. So one of the big questions is, why would we bother with source control? And it may be a little bit of a extra work in the beginning, but part of it is, for one, if you have a source control repository set up, is you can track the code history. So that's one of the big ones. So it's like, how many times have we, say, implemented or developed a store procedure, pushed it in, and then forget what was the one that we deployed like before or a few years ago even. So if you have source control, you can track pretty much every single time that you've made any changes to any of your SQL objects. The second part that is handy as well is being able to roll back changes. So let's say I pushed like a store procedure in and it breaks my development environment, then being able to roll back that change is pretty handy. And another big one is collaboration. So it's a little bit easier now with Azure SQL allowing you to have local instances, but if, say, you've got one development environment, but you want to be able to, each developer be able to develop using their own code base, then source control also allows that collaboration as well. And then the second part is why bother with CI/CD, the continuous integration and continuous deployment. It's basically automating your builds and your deployments. And I guess who doesn't like automation, right? So being able to allow you to easily automate and validate your builds, automating of your deployments, so you can do exactly the same thing into your different environments, development, production, and also, like the environment management as well. So being able to kind of have gates on what kind of approvals you need, or if somebody has to go through development first and it has to pass certain tests before it goes to production. So CI/CD kind of helps control of that. So I guess with that out of the way, we'll start talking about the demo. So I'll jump right into it. So the demo today would cover first, how to source control your existing database. So for that, the technologies we'll be using is Azure DevOps using Git, Visual Studio 2022 with SSDT SQL Server development tools installed, and then also an Azure SQL instance, which is AdventureWorks LT. After the first part of the demo, we'll then talk about how to actually automate the build and deployments using Azure DevOps pipelines. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop in the chat or just shout out as well. Okay. So I've created a DevOps project for AdventureWorks, and this is using the Scrum methodology, but we've created a sprint here for which in this first part we talk about how we would source control the Azure SQL database. And the reason I've set up all these tasks is so that I can show you how it traces through when you create a task. So the first part that I want to work on is I want to add, I've already provisioned an AdventureWorks LT on my Azure portal. So, which is right here. So the first thing I want to do is to be able to add that to my source control in Visual Studio. All right. So the first thing I want to do is to be able to initialize a empty Git repository. And in order to do that, you first have to go to the repos tab right here. And under here, you can go new repository. Under that, put in any name you want. So we can go AdventureWorks demo or something like that. And then within the Git ignore, we want to add Visual Studio right here. So what that does is it'll make sure that any system files that you've got in regards to Visual Studio won't be checked in. So that's pretty important. So I have one already created right here. So once it initializes, this is the two files that would first initialize. And you can see, like, say the git ignore has all the system and the build folders that we don't want, and it comes with the README as well. So the next part I want to do is I don't want to mess with my main branch. So it's always good practice to create a feature branch first. And with that feature branch, I can also link to that task that I created before to say this is the task that is related to my branch. So I'll add a branch called add AdventureWorks to source control and create. So now I can see that I've created a branch here. So the next part I want to do is to be able to clone this repository onto my Visual Studio instance. So to do that, you can click on clone. And then under here, go Visual Studio. And then it will try to open an instance of Visual Studio for you to clone. So what that does is it will copy whatever's on the server onto your local machine. So I've already done that before, so I'm just going to connect to this folder right here. Yeah, sometimes it takes a while to wake up. So here's one that I prepared earlier. So under that, you can see after you've pressed the cloned, you can see now that the git ignore and the README file that was on the server now resides on your own computer. So if I open it in my file explorer, you can see that it's been saved here. So then next I want to switch to the branch that I've created. So I'll go main, do a fetch. So this is the branch I created. So I want to switch to it. double click to switch to the branch. And now I'm ready to create my database project. So in order to do that, I go File, New Project. And this part is, so you need to install, SSDT onto here in order to be able to see this. Is anyone else having issues with seeing my screen?
No, I can see it, Annie.
Alright.
No,
good.
it's all good here too.
Right. So yeah, Joshua, you might need to try and restart or rejoin. Cool. So then under here, I want to then create a new database project. So next, project name, VentureWorks LT. And I always like to place the solution and project in the same directory just to keep everything neat. Okay, so it'll just take a few minutes to create. Yeah, so once that's created, you can see that is now a solution with a project. So the next part I need to do is go to the properties. So these are all the database versions that you can look into. So in terms of this particular one, we want to go into Azure SQL Database, but it does all the on-prem ones and also Azure SQL Data Warehouse as well. All right. And then after that, I want to save this. And now I want to import my database from the Azure SQL. So in order to do that, right click, import database. And under here, you just want to select your connection, which gives you the connection string and your username and whichever authentication method that you want. So I just go connect. I'll put in my password. And now I can choose to import. Yeah, so what that does is at the moment it's scanning the schema. And then based on that, gathering all the objects, and then it'll create them as files and then save it onto my project. Okay, so that was pretty fast this time around. Yeah, so under here now, we can see I've got AdventureWorks LT, and you can see that before, because we chose to have it as the schema / object type for the structure. So that's what it did. And then under here, you can see, say, the sales tables with all the table names and everything, like imported here. So we just want to do a save all. And under the Git changes tab, yeah, you can see that all of these files are the ones that I've created. And I can commit this into my branch. So a syntax that's handy is the hash syntax. So if you refer to the work item that was created before, which I'll show you again in a bit, then you can attach your commits into with your work items. So I'll say add VentureWorks to source control. So commit or and push. Yeah, so now it's successfully pushed to my remote. So that means that if I now go to my repository and then change to this branch, you can see now that everything's been pushed onto the server, and you can see it right there. Another neat thing is if I go back to my work item right here, so this is my 115 work item, you can see that under development now, that's the branch that I referred to before, and then this is the commit that I just did right now. And if I click on this, it's all traceable. So you can see that I clicked on that commit, and then it shows me, hey, these are all the files that's been added in so far. Okay. So the next part of that is now I'm ready to push this back into my main branch. So in order to do that, it prompted me here as well, create a pull request. It also prompted me in this work item as well, this branch, do I want to create a pull request? You can also just do it straight from the repo pull request. And it'll say, hey, you've updated this branch. Do you want to create a pull request? So I just click on that. It tells me that I'm trying to push my old branch into the main branch. So right here, you can give it a description, the work items that is linked to, and also any reviewers as well. So for this demo, I'll review my own code, but I can go create. So as the reviewer, I can then look at the files and see what's been changed. And if I'm happy with it, I can do an approval. And in order to merge this back into main, then you click on complete. And then I can say I want to complete all my associate work items as well. Go complete merge. Then if we go back to the task, you can see that it's automatically closed my task. It also has an indicator to say that for this task, what happened was there was a pull request which was completed on linked here. And then if I now go to the repo and then go to my branches, we can see that the old branch has been deleted, but this new branch now has the VentureWorks database in it. Right. So that was a pretty speedy intro into Visual Studio database projects. Does anyone have any questions at this point? All right. Great question, David. So what is a pull request? So a pull request basically is a request to pull a feature branch into another branch. The most used, the main use case is that we want to pull a branch into our main, which is normally the main branch will be your production branch, or it could be, say, another strategy for branching is, say, environment-based as well, or release-based. So let's say if there's an environment-based branching of a developed branch, then you could create a pull request to pull from a feature branch into a developed branch. And then when that's ready to go into production, then you do a pull request from your developed branch into your main branch. So Miriam, that's a great question on if you want to do a rollback if something goes wrong. For databases, rollbacks are a bit tricky. So because a lot of the times with a database release, especially with like say schema changes, it's a little bit difficult to do an actual rollback without, say, the chance of data loss as well. But so I would suggest like to attempt that with a lot of caution. But in terms of rollback, sometimes it's better to do a roll forward. But in terms of a rollback in, let's say your files, so within your history So I don't have enough history on this at the moment, but you've got the ability to create, say, a branch of an existing commit or a history. And then basically you would then do an assessment and see if you were able to like republish that out or not. Cool. Is there any other questions or any follow-ups before I continue? Okay. So the next part of the demo, what I'll show you is how do I. So it's to set a bit of a background. So I want to show how to actually create a make a change and then deploy the changes through Visual Studio, and then do that manually before I then go to show how to do it to automate it through CI/CD. So this is just to set a bit of context. So in terms of that, so the next part would be, let's say,
I thought maybe, second moment, there was a question about solving conflicts in a merge.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great question as well. So there's a few ways that I like to do it. So for one, there's a really handy extension called, let me try and see if we've got it installed. So extensions, this one. So pull request merge conflict extension. So within that, so I don't think I've got any conflicts that I can show right at this moment. But what would happen is within your pull request, there will actually, so see this tab. So this tab is a result of having that extension created. Yeah. So what happens is it will give you a side-by-side view on what the two conflicts are, and then within that you can then choose what to keep and what not to keep. So that's one option for simple conflicts. The other conflicts, the other way to do it is you can do it directly in Visual Studio. So in order to do that, you would want to pull, say, your main branch back into your feature branch, and then that will show you all the conflicts that could happen. And then within that, you can then right click, and then there's native editors where you can then as well have the two views on the two files, and then be able to choose which lines to keep and which lines not to. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a demonstration on that for this time, but yeah, that's the two ways that I would do it. Okay. So yeah, so in terms of this now, let's say I want to make a change to my customer table. So let's say I just want to rename my last name to my surname. All right. So in order to do that, first I want to create a feature branch to house that. So I'll just go back to my main branch and do a fetch, which would give me my previous changes that I've done. It's always a good habit to regularly do a fetch and a pull on your main branch, just so that you've got the latest code base. Yeah. So yeah, so now my Adventure Works is in my main branch. And now I want to do a local branch of like rename column. Like that. Locate my customer table. So under here, so I want to change my column of last name to surname. So we can just change it like this. But now if you do a build, it will actually give me some errors. So within those errors, it's actually telling me that I've got unresolved references because I have a function that is referring to that. So instead, Visual Studio allows you to do a refactor. So in order to do that, so I right-click refactor, rename, so surname, and with the preview changes right here, you can see that it's trying to rename my table, but it's also find the function right here, and then it wants to rename that in there as well. So if I go apply, and then save all, under the Git changes, you can see that it's created a it's trying to make a change for so my text editor is not working, but so just identify that I want to make a change for the function and also the table as well. You can also see that it's trying to check in this refactor log. So what the refactor log does is a native SQL Server thing that's been around for ages. And if there's like a system hidden table in all the SQL databases, and it's just flagging to you that when I want to do this, I want to do a rename instead of a drop and create. So it has the smarts to then be able to execute that in the DACPack deployment to say that that's a rename and preserve all the data that's already in this column. All right, so now if I do a build, so it's showing that it's succeeded. So, and it's already generated the DACPack ready for my deployment. So to do my deployment, if I want to do that manually in Visual Studio, what I can do is then right click and go publish. So under here, I choose my target connection, which is the one I prepared earlier. If you click publish, it will generate the scripts and then run the change straight away. But if you go generate scripts, you can actually integrate what it's trying to run. Yeah, so how this works is it uses the compiled DACPack, and then it does a comparison between what you've got on the server, the target server, and what's in the DACPack, and then it generates the scripts based on how it wants to run the deployment. So this is a SQL CMD script, and under this, you can see it does a few kind of preparation scripts. And then the main part here is this operation was generated from a refactoring log file, renaming last name to surname, executes a rename. It also then alters the function to change it to the surname, and then it tells me update complete. If I'm happy to run this and execute this onto the server, I can just go execute. Yeah, then it'll complete the execution. So now if I go onto the server right here, you can see that that's now been renamed to be surname. All right, so that's how you do like a manual deployment on using Visual Studio after making some changes. So as part of that, I should also just push this, just go through all that and push it back into my main branch. So that's 116. Yep, so I've now pushed that into the rename column branch. And you can also see the commit that's just appeared right here. So I now want to create a pull request on this branch. And under, so let me just create the pull request first. So myself as the reviewer. Yeah. So now let's say that this pull request is ready for peer review. So what would happen is then I would, if I put on my peer reviewer hat, I would then go into pull request, and then under the files, I'll be able to see exactly what's been changed. So clicking through that, I can see, yep. So there's a function here, the customer, the last name's changed to surname. I've added the refactor log, which talks about the last name being added. Also, there's also a change in the SQL project, which is adding the refactor log. So if I'm happy with that change, I can approve it, and then the developer then can then complete it and delete the branch as well. Cool. So that's manual deployment. Any questions at this point before I go through the CI/CD part?
Yes, just a very quick question. So if you have many, if you rename many things in different branches, does it keep appending the renaming to the refactor log, or does it replace the new rename on the refactor log? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
How does it work?
Yeah, so it'll keep like adding pretty much a history of all the
Oh,
renames.
history. Okay.
Yeah, so if you say rename, so the CI/CD does try, like, it's good practice to deploy often. So hopefully there wouldn't be like too many renames on the same object before you've pushed it to the next production. Yeah.
But if you've got
um,
renames across different objects,
yeah, so
that
it'll
will
keep
keep
appending
a
it.
log of all the renames
Yeah,
since day one.
I think so. So
Okay.
only if you do it through the refactor in
Yeah.
Visual Studio.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's like in the it
But
must be here.
but it's very important to use the refactoring capability of Visual Studio, isn't it? Otherwise, if you do it manually, if you handcraft the rename, it will try to drop the column or reinstate a column.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because what would happen if I just change the name and do a find and replace? Yeah, it will actually drop the column.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so the refactor log is here under the system tables. And within the Visual Studio, so the file is kept, and it also gives an ID here as well. So that's how it keeps tracks that, yeah, this rename has been executed because it's in the refactor log within the system table.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so we'll move on to the next part in regards to the automation of the build and deploy using the Azure pipelines, DevOps pipelines. So the first thing you need to do is you need to set the correct permissions. In order to do that, you need to create a service principal in Azure DevOps and then grant it permissions to be able to do any deployments using the service principal. So I've already done that. So I'm pretty sure I ran that one before as well. But that's pretty important in the beginning. So the next part I want to do is to automate the build. So by that, what I mean is this function here. So in Visual Studio build, and what that does is it validates your database code to make sure that you don't have any breaking changes. And it also generates the DAC pack for deployment. So in order to do that, yeah. So the first part I wanted to go is if I create a new pipeline. So under the pipelines tab, pane in pipelines, you go create a new pipeline. And we want to do an Azure repo of Git. Choose your repository, and I'll create one from scratch. You can also import one. So one of the options before was an existing pipeline, but this one I'll create one from scratch. And then under here, so we can put it into a location. Let's do it under this area. And yeah, so this is using YAML, so it's another language to learn, because we data engineers like to collect them all. But in terms of here with the trigger, so what this is saying is this is what triggers this pipeline to run, which is a push into main. Yeah. So as long as there's any new code that goes into main, this whole pipeline will run. The next part is the pull. So how this works is what we wanted to do is it will spin up a VM with, let's say, Visual Studio on it, and then it will programmatically do the build within that machine that it spun up. So Ubuntu doesn't have Visual Studio on it, but there is Microsoft documentation to talk about what agents that you can use and what's actually installed on it. So in this case, what we want is the Windows 2022, which would have Visual Studio already installed. The reason why I didn't go Windows latest is because that bit me before. We used to be 2019, and then when Windows latest became 2022, our DevOps pipelines broke because it still was expecting Visual Studio 2019. So that's why I know that I'm using Visual Studio 2022. So that's what I'm going to specify instead of the risk of it updating on me. So now the next part is to add the steps for the build. So in order to do that, I delete all this code that's already there. And so I want to create a stage for the build stage. And then the next part is I want to generate the step to do that build. So under show assistance, I want to get the Visual Studio build task. And under here, I just say I want to build anything that looks like a SLN file. You can specify exactly the AdventureWorks one, but I'll just leave it like this for the demo. And then I go add. Right. Yeah, so now that's added a task to do the build. I can also then add some extras, like say the display name, so that it's a little bit easier to debug and view later on. Right, and yeah, so what that does now is it will generate that DAC pack into this folder right here. So the next part is I want to expose that DAC pack so that I can use it for my deployments later on. So in order to do that, I want to then create a second task for copying the files from my build repository, which is this one here. So see right there, it put it into AdventureWorks LT bin debug AdventureWorks. So under here, this is where I'm telling it to go. So AdventureWorks LT bin debug, give me everything. And the target folder is I want to put it into a staging folder right here. So add. And the third part that's critical is to then publish the build artifacts. So what that does is it'll publish everything that is in the staging folder, and then I'll show you where that goes afterwards. So the 3 tasks. So I can save it. So let's say that's all right. So now I can run it. Okay. Yeah, so Sarath, that's a great question in terms of preferring to do DACPAC deployments over SQL file deployments. I always prefer to do DACPAC deployments. Yeah, and as Victor mentioned, yeah, it's a state-based approach. Reason for that is, I guess I don't have to worry about all the migration approaches and all the different scripts. I just know that this is what the database should look like, and this is how I want it to look like. So all I have to maintain is all my creation scripts instead of having to worry about yeah, so for this release, well, yeah, what did I like what are the auto scripts that I have to create, and then for the next one, like which in terms of the order of how you have to do it. Whereas if you just state-based approach, you can theoretically kind of abandon part of the, like say a feature halfway, as long as your state is correct in the final one, and then you can still deploy that without having to make changes. Okay, so now that that build is complete, we can see under the related, there's now the one published. Yeah, so in that publish, we can see that the DACPAC, and it also generated the DLL and the PDB as well, but the main one we're interested in is the DACPAC in the artifacts. Yeah, so that's the automation of, yeah, pretty much doing this build. Yeah. So the next part of it is to do the deployment. So now I want to automate the function of this right-click publish, this function right here. So in order to do that, I can go back into my pipeline and go edit to continue on this one. So the next part I want to do is to then create a stage for the deployment. So under this, let's say, so adding a stage for deployment. It depends on the build being completed. So as long as your stage is called, if it's not successful, it won't continue. The deployment, the environment is development. And the first thing I want to do is, because it's a different stage, I have to re-download my artifact. So I go download my current artifact, which is in drop, which is what I published up here. So the next part of it is then to do a DACPAC deployment. So if you search DACPAC, you can see that there's the Azure SQL database deployment right here. So under this, the connection type, go service connection is development. I want to do a service principal connection. And I just realized that I haven't tested my connection today, so let's hope that it works. And so under here, I want to put my Azure SQL Server right there and database name. Yeah, so go add. Yeah, so what that does now is it will then use the service principal to attempt to do a deployment onto this database based on the DAC pack. There's also there's a lot of documentation online about the YAML and how it applies to Azure DevOps. But there's actually, let's say the display name that I showed you before, there's also things like condition, where you can specify a specific condition, such as this will only execute if it's like in the context of a main branch. So if you try to push anything to other branches, it wouldn't execute, and other things like that. But for this one, let me try to do a save. All right. So now that I've saved that, actually, I'll see if it actually, yeah, it did trigger. So the reason why it triggered is when I saved it to the main branch, it was based on this. So now, yeah, because I saved it directly to the main branch, it triggered it to do the build and the deploy again. All right, any other questions so far?
There's a question from Matt, and he asks if you recommend having a pull request triggered pipeline to also do a build to ensure the solution compiles before committing to the main branch.
Yes, definitely. So the way that I've done it so far is within your branch, what you can do is under here with branch policies, you can add a pipeline for build validation right here. So this is normally what I do. And then I can say, yep, so I want to use this build pipeline. I use the same one for my build validation and for my deployments. And how I control that is within my build pipeline here, I would have a very specific, and that's where I would do the condition. So I would say the deploy condition is if I, something like this. So if my source branch where it's getting pushed to is the main, then I would do a deploy. Otherwise, it would never do a deploy. And by setting this condition up and also setting this build validation up, what you would see under the pipelines here is, see how it's got the two different stages. For all the build validations, it would just execute the first build validate and then it would stop. Whereas when you do a deployment, it would then execute both. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. And the second one is key vault. So Oleg, you talked about key vault. So is this in context of setting the environments and the variables? Or?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm not sure if I've got, yeah, I do. So I've got some libraries here. So within the libraries, what you can do is you can set your variables for your different environments. So yeah, so under this, let's say this is my server name for my development environment, and this is my server name for my production. But what you can do as well is you can then link your secrets to a key vault as variables. So instead of me doing this manually like this in this demo, you can link to a key vault, which will actually erase all your variables with the same name. And that way you can then say link your development environment to your dev key vault, your production environment to your prod key vault, and then store all your connection strings there. Once you've got that, then I don't think I've got an example here, but you can then refer to the libraries and then be able to reference any of those variables pretty much in this way in your pipelines going forward. So I can then say, let's say instead of Adventure Works, I can go database name like that, and then it will go back to the library, then interrogate the key vault to get this value right here. So, all right. Okay, so one thing I didn't show was approvals. So because I said I wanted to deploy to the development environments, I've actually set it up an environment prior right here with the name development. And under this, if you go to approvals and checks, you can add any of these gates. So under here, you can say, I want to control the branch in which a deployment can happen. In this case, like you can do business hours as well. In this case, I added a approval condition right here to say that I need to approve before a deployment would go ahead, which is why it's kind of been paused and waiting. Yeah, so to do that, I would have gotten an email, but I can also review right here and say approve, and now then it'll execute forward. So while that's running and testing if I've set up my permissions correctly to do a deployment, is there any other questions so far?
Nothing new, Annie.
All right. Cool.
How frequent do you modify these type of solutions, one that you have built it initially and put the effort upfront?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, probably don't have permissions properly, but that's a good question. So once you generate this, you wouldn't touch it again for a long time. Yeah, so because basically you want to make sure that your deployments are standardized. So you wouldn't, yeah, and the function that it's trying to do is also quite basic in that all it's doing is a build and a deploy. So this is probably a once set and forget. The only time you would change it is, let's say new functionality came out. So one of the these stages wasn't something that was available when I first started using it. So once that functionality came out, then yes, there's another enhancement onto this pipeline. The other is like, say, the VM image. So let's say the new Visual Studios come out and you want to change the image, then that's when you would make a change. Yeah, okay. So the reason my pipeline has failed, normally the errors are pretty descriptive as well, which is pretty good. So it's saying that no files were found to deploy. And the reason for that is because when I set it up, I didn't specify DACPAC. file. So let me just specify where that one is. Yeah. So once you create this using the task and add it, you can always just click on the settings and it would bring this one back up. And under that, I think that one should be the right one. Yeah, when you go add, it will just amend this right here. So it's 116, 120. Hopefully that would have fixed that bug. Right. So while that's running, I guess just a recap in terms of looking at the history. So if I now look at each individual file, let's say the customer file, I'll be able to look at the history, and under that it'll show me exactly what's been happening with it. So it shows me that it was added today at 5:30, and then there was an edit on it. And I believe you can also, yeah, so if you click on these ones, it will show you exactly what's been changed. So it's like the benefit of using DevOps for all of this is just the ease of traceability. Yeah. Okay. So question from Victor about any suggestion for unit testing. That's a great question. I haven't really had too much experience being able to effectively unit test, but I do know that TSQL-T is a like a pretty decent framework for unit testing. It works really well with Azure SQL and any SQL Server, but I haven't been able to get it to work out of the box with Synapse dedicated SQL pools. So I believe that you have to do a little bit more custom code if you want to get it to work with dedicated SQL pools. Yeah, but the unit test integration with DevOps is pretty neat, like the possibilities of it. Let me just approve this one. Yeah, because what would happen is if you do have a test that is like, say, an N unit format and you publish it, there will actually be a test tab that would appear here. And then after that, you can see all your test results just from the pipeline. Cool. I think that pretty much concludes the demonstration and the presentation. So does anyone else have any other questions?
Thank you very
from, sorry, Victor, there's one more from Mariam in the chat about examples for doing CI/CD with YAML for R Studio projects.
Right. Yeah, I haven't had experience with R Studio projects at all, so I'm sorry I can't really answer too much on that one.
That was amazing, Annie. Thank you for that. Hey guys, let's open the microphones and clap a little bit for Annie, please.
Thank you.
Come on, guys.
And it also has a green tick, so.
Thank you, Andy.
It was a very good session. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Great stuff. Well, I hope everyone learned something from it or finds some of
We
it
did.
useful for your work. So
That was very good, Annie. The only thing I would say is in terms of checking into Microsoft, you know how you're creating feature branches. One thing I've done in my other project is basically gone into branch policies and basically said to deploy to master, you need at least 2 approvers. So that will physically stop somebody from actually pushing any changes into master themselves.
yeah, that's a great one as well. And that's something that we've implemented too in terms of enforcing the minimum number of reviewers. So yeah, that's a great point.
Just in addition to that, I think there's another setting in there along the same way and basically says if you've made the change, you can't deploy to master. So it has to be somebody that's not you. It doesn't work as well, I've noticed, when you only have 1 or 2 developers in the team and you need to push changes. So for some of those, you need a big team to be able to do it. But it's 2 good settings to have. At least the 2 approvers one, that'll force you to actually stop and think about where you're making that change, and you'll get an error if you don't do it quite right.
Yeah. And I guess for some visual on what Sarah's talking about, it's under, if you go to branches, branch policies, where I did the build validation before. Yeah, so it's just turning it on here. So minimum number of requirements, and yeah, you can also by default block requesters to approve their own changes. One that I also really like for I guess enforcing the ways of working is this one. So check for linked work items. And that one just makes sure that every single change that people are trying to push is actually linked to a user story or work item. So for traceability. Actually, this one I also turn on as well. So check for comment resolution. So it's just whenever someone puts a comment onto the pull request, that enforces that the developer has looked at it and has considered it as well, to make sure that they've actually clicked a button to say resolved.
So with that one, Annie, do you get an error, like when you're doing a pull request or a merge request, do you get a message saying there's a comment you need to review?
Yeah, I can show you quickly this time. So so I've turned on all of this. Actually, I'll just turn these 2 off just to make sure, create a really quick one. So first, yeah. So let's say I create a pull request right here. And then someone adds a comment, right? So comment. The person won't be able to complete until that comment is resolved. So at the moment it's inactive. So it would actually, you can set autocomplete, but I don't know. So, yeah. So it will tell you that you can't complete it because all comments haven't been resolved. So it'll force the developer to say, like close it. And then now that the checks have been resolved, so then now they can complete it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for the presentation. So we'll do all the video editing, and it will take us around 4 months, and I'll upload the video to YouTube after that. I'll try to do it soon, okay? Maybe next 10 days. And yeah, look, going hybrid the next month. So hopefully I can see you in the Brisbane Microsoft office. If not, I'll see you. I hope you can join in Teams. We still need to lock in the speaker. We're looking for speakers. We're always looking for speakers. So if you want to share something that you're working on with the community or a specific topic, let me know. Shoot us an email and we'll schedule something for you. And with that, I'll let you go. Look, 6:19, perfect time for a beer. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Well done,
Thank you.
Annie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Bye.
Thanks for the presentation, Annie. Bye.
All right, thank you.